This episode of ChatGPD was made possible by the hard work and creativity of our production team. A huge thank you to Chris Sang, Alakia Chandran, and Shakoyak Forazan for their expert production, editing, and behind-the-scenes magic that brings each conversation to life. We also want to thank Sarah Toba and the IMS for their support in helping us share ideas, stories, and resources that empower our grad students at every stage of their journey. Welcome to another episode of ChatGPD, our podcast on careers in biomedical science. I'm Pamela Plant, and I'm the Director of Graduate Professional Development at the Institute of Medical Science. And I'm joined here today with our guest, Dr. Sara Sharifpoor, who is the Director in the Office of Research and Health Science Education at the University of Toronto. Is that right, Sarah?
That is correct. You had it right.
Yes. Welcome. So pleased that you came.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm always happy to support any initiative that supports the graduate students and potential, career options for them in the future.
Well, that's a great segue to my first question, which is, can you just describe your role? Because director is a very all-encompassing word. So can you just describe what your role is at the University of Toronto?
So my role is to lead an administrative team of about 25 to 30 people, depending on the different portfolios. And our goal is to facilitate all research operations and research administration for the Faculty of Medicine, as well as all the educational initiatives. So that includes student services. So we're sort of like the hub in the decanal office that follows the mandate of the university, which is research and education. And we're sort of the higher body, if anything, that helps all the departments, including IMS, make sure that their students are well supported from, basic, funding support all the way up to wellness supports and mental health, et cetera. And on the research side, I see us as sort of the enablers of science. We make sure that faculty members are successful. They have infrastructure allocations ready for them. When there's changes in the operations in the university, it doesn't impact their productivity. And then we also assess how well they're performing, so that when they do need help, we're right there helping them write grants, edit their proposals for them. And so our office is really, I like to think of us as facilitators of science and education.
And you've also just described about 10 or 15 different jobs in your one job.
Yes.
So we're going to get to that later because it just sounds like both an incredible and an overwhelming job. But I would love to know how you got to where you are, because you do have a basic science degree in molecular genetics, and very similar to a lot of our graduate students who are kind of contemplating different career options. I would love you to just describe your own journey. What led you into your PhD, and then what you did after that to land you to where you are now?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting when I'm attending these sessions, because I think the possibility of having careers outside of bench work or like hardcore science was never something that we were exposed to. Exactly. But it sort of started with me realizing, based on my PhD project, that I was really good at keeping data organized, because I had a large scale biology project. It was a systems biology project. I was very good at making sure that deliverables, if we had collaborators working with us, were done on times to meet my, committee meetings. Did my PhD in 4.5 years and got 2 papers out. I was very sort of timely and very much a problem solver. And I think that's one thing that was very eye-opening for me, is that I don't have to necessarily do research to be participating in research. So it all happened after I graduated my PhD. I really had no intention of thinking about a career in administration, but also didn't really have any set plans as to what I wanted to do. I had contemplated doing a computational postdoc at some point after I finished, thinking it's something completely different than bench work. And that was at the cusp of when bioinformatics was really, taking off. But then I realized that, an opportunity came in our own lab, where our own lab manager and research associate was going to go on maternity leave. And so she left for a year, and I thought, well, it's just 1 year. Like, how bad could it be for me to try this for a year? I also had a couple of review papers I was writing, and I didn't wanted to kind of finish them. A few experiments that, when you get really into your science, you want to kind of finish off. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity. And big shout out to my supervisor at the time, Dr. Brenda Andrews in molecular genetics. She actually was the one that encouraged me, and she said, "You're really good at this, and you should do this for a year. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. You don't have to commit to it." So a year passed, and in that 1 year, I learned a lot about, how to write proposals. Even though I'd participated in them, it was very different when you had to write budgets and budget justifications and read eligibility requirements. And so I learned a lot of research admin on the job there. But I also learned some HR because now I had to assign certain projects to technicians to do the work in the lab. I learned a lot about finance because we had limited, budget available. I had to see how much money do we have and what experiments are crucial and the best return on our investment, to focus on so that we can get the lab be productive and get the results we want. So, within a year, I realized this is actually very important to have someone who understands the science guide the spend, guide the hiring. And so that's really what motivated me to continue. And, fast forward, 10 years, I went from managing a lab to managing two labs to then an entire department. And now I'm managing the research admin for the faculty. So it's really been a slow and steady progression. And what's really guided my career personally has always been every challenging new job or new opportunity or new problem that comes even daily to my desk. I look at it as this is an opportunity for me to dig deep, fix a problem that somebody needs help with that nobody has been able to solve, which is why it's come to me. So and I think this is a problem that every PhD student, every master's student is handed. They're given a new problem to solve. And so we're very good at that. And I think, if graduate students just realize how important that skill set is, that is something you use no matter what job you have, especially in leadership, let alone the communication skills you have and, the ability to present and pitch something to someone like a defense. I do that daily now. And so very much using experiences and knowledge I've gained in my PhD daily to be successful in my current role.
So, aside from exceptional organization and communication and some of the others you mentioned, what do you think are really the most useful core competencies that you develop in your degree that you are using on a daily basis now?
I think when I was doing science, I was very well versed in recognizing when I've reached a point where I can't solve something and recognizing that someone else knows how. We're very good at this in science, right? We reach out to the person who's done the weird assay that only 3 people in the world have and, or knows about the potential problems in a computational problem that most people haven't really come across. This is the skill set that you need in any role, especially in my role, because I know when to step into a problem and say, I can fix this. But I also know when I can say, this isn't me, this is my colleague, or this is my leader, or this is my staff. And I think a huge part of managing a team is that. So, you read my title, which is director. I literally see myself as directing the work to the right people. And that is the big part of my job, and coordinating all this work so that the package that is delivered is the right package. It's going to the right people. It's meeting the timelines, and it's delivering what is expected for that project. So it's, these are the skills you develop every day doing graduate work that you kind of forget or that you just oversee them. You don't see them as really translatable skills, but those are the valuable skills. It's not the gene names you memorized. It's not the assays you knew, right? Because those change. Like, I did my PhD literally 15 years ago. And, my entire master's was developing a single vector. that was how it was, and like I remember speaking to our supervisor, like, oh my God, we had to design our own primers. We had to make our own
Oh my
primers. Now you
God.
just
Yeah.
order, right? Like,
Now you order everything.
that's it. And so the same is true. Science moves fast, right? So those skills, as valuable as they are with AI and all the databases we have, they're less important. What's really important is your problem solving skills, your ability to communicate with people around you, and also to build a case with all this scattered amount of information, so you can get things done. Either it's receive funding or, convince people to take on a project. It doesn't matter. Or even hire the right person. You need those skills.
And you need to know how to articulate those skills.
That's
so
right.
realize you have them and able to articulate it to the particular job that you're applying to.
That's it.
Oh, there's just so many avenues I want to go, but I think I want to get back to your role because it is so multifaceted. So can you just walk us through like kind of what your workload looks like in terms of, what percent are you on research admin versus space and facilities management versus the educational portfolio, and maybe what you do in each of those portfolios or how you direct, what kind of strategies or programs that you direct within those different subcategories of your job?
Yeah, so I would say the bulk of my work is focused on the research side because it just happens to be a larger portfolio. And in fact, I have a very, very capable colleague who, she's my right hand, Joanna King. She's amazing at running some of these programs, but there's an operations side of it, which probably is it's all me. And the reason for that is that I am the person who worked in a lab. And so I understand the equipment, I understand the biosafety guidelines, et cetera. Then there's the programmatic work day to day that we do. And that really depends on the deadlines. For example, grant deadlines are what really dictate what I'm going to do that day. In March, everybody's making sure the grant deadlines are like all the requirements for the grant deadlines. We do a lot of editorial work. We think about which ones are successful. And then, before
You do internal reviewing as well?
That's correct. We organize internal review committees. We, do actual editorial review of certain grants.
A lot of work.
It's a lot of work. And again, I want to be very clear. I don't do this. I coordinate it. There's a significant number of people who participate in this. They always say this, a manager is only as good as the team that they have. And I have an awesome team. And so that we get a lot of programs out very quickly. But then on the education side, the bulk of my work is typically before the academic year. So, this week, just as an example, I had to make sure I give enrollment counts to all the departments, including IMS, how many PhD students to take in, how many master's students to take in. So there's some budgetary calculations that happen in the back end that decide what are the minimum number of students we need to get for the department to be able to be sustainable. So there's those business decisions that happen that are sort of in parallel with the academic decisions. And then there's, of course, other things like time to completion. I'm involved in that, making sure policies around certain awards are created. So it really, every day, it depends on the deadline that's coming in. Sometimes my day is exclusively focused on educational initiatives. Other times, I'm right there in research operations solving a problem about a big flood that happened somewhere, and I have to sort it out and figure out who is
Never a dull moment.
Never a
It's
dull
always
moment.
something new.
Sometimes I could take the steady state, to be honest with you.
Not possible. There are a few things that kind of jumped out at me. One is the financial piece, two is the strategy piece, and three is the leading and the people management piece. And those are really very, very specialized skill sets that you might not hone as a grad student. Yes. So how did you develop those? Was that just kind of on the job training, or are there some other extra credentialing things that you did to kind of bolster those skill sets? Or what would you recommend for our grad students that are contemplating administrative roles that really feel ill-equipped to kind of pick and lead and conflict manage and manage people when really they work in a lab of 4 people, so they haven't really built those skills?
So I think it's a combination of personality and skill set when it comes to people management. So I think internally as a person, if you were on a project in the lab, while you were in the lab, that involved multiple stakeholders, that involved multiple people, if you engaged your colleagues in the lab, you have the potential of being a good manager, right? You just have to learn those skill sets. And a lot of those I learned by having, supervisory roles to summer students. I would, where I had an opportunity to TA, I TA'd, where I had an opportunity to even help the summer students on their posters or go to conferences with them. Like they have these little networking events in the summer. I would make sure I would attend those just to kind of learn how to be, even just how to be supportive of someone that's your junior. So I think those are sort of the ways you can engage, at least informally, when you're a grad student. And then formally, once you start a job at any institution, they don't immediately throw you into managing. Like this is, I mean, it doesn't even make sense from a career development perspective. So I didn't manage people right away. I was sort of like a research associate that was helping summer student hirings, and so much more junior staff. New graduate students who were coming in, I would train them on things, and it started very slow. And then by the end of my first year, it was, as a lab manager, is when I actually started to realize, oh gosh, I have to learn how to resolve this conflict between two technicians because they just don't get along. And it's as simple as you playing Meat Eater with your friends. It's really no different. But how do you compartmentalize it so that you're being fair, hearing both sides, and actually finding a solution? And sometimes it means rejigging what you're assigning to one versus the other. So that portion I learned on the job. And then once I became a formal manager, like a professional managerial employee group, which is sort of a more senior role, University of Toronto gave me a proper HR training. It's actually a 4-day, at the time it was a 4-day course that you had to sort of like go on site, and it was all how to write a job description, how to interview people, how do you resolve conflict. So there was some on the job training that was necessary as well. So that deals with the HR part. In terms of the finance experience, this was really, the way I saw it is a lab is a home, and I want to protect my resources in my home. It's no different than you assessing how much money do I have for groceries or for my car? Can I afford to upgrade my car? It's the same type of thing. There's revenues and then there's expenses. A good budgetarian in a lab thinks about all sources of revenue and all possible expenses and leaves a little bit of contingency. And so I just literally started with that.
Yeah,
and it was
strategy.
I just started with that, and that led to, I did take a couple of courses in accounting when I first started, and I thought it would be helpful. Full disclosure, after three sessions of sitting in here, I was like, this is not for me.
Yeah,
I don't know why I'm doing this.
Yeah, accounting as a profession is very different than accounting that
correct.
you need for your role. You have professional accountants at U of T
That's
to
right.
do the minutia.
That's
You
it.
just have to have the global sense of what the budget is.
And in fact, I think that was really eye-opening, that is my strength. I have the overall picture, so I can work with an accountant to do that. And of course, I learned a lot from my colleagues, my accounting colleagues. They were busy, and I said, oh, can I learn how to get into the system? And they're like, sure, you need approval from your supervisor. And of course, like my supervisor was very supportive and, open to me learning. So I learned that. I took a few courses in how to manage the databases. And, now I can run all my reports myself through the system. And sometimes people are a little bit, surprised because my degree is a PhD. Why am I like running line item reports and funding FC reports? And why not?
You
right?
enjoy learning.
I enjoy learning, and eventually when you become into leadership roles, you're managing folks who are helping you with this work. So it allows you to understand how to assign the work to them, what's a reasonable ask in terms of timeline, what's not. So if anything, aside from the fact that it gives you credibility to manage these very capable accountants, it also helps you make sure that you're not overworking them or exhausting them or asking them something that should take them, 2 minutes and they're not responding to you for days. So it just gives you good skill sets as a manager too. So that's really the finance side, I would say, is how it developed. And then in terms of communication, you mentioned, and strategy, this I never learned outside of anywhere but the lab. Like, to me, the lab taught me strategy. You think of a problem, you solve the problem, you move on. If you can't solve the problem, you go back to the drawing board, you rejig the experiment, and then you find another way. That's strategizing, right? Communication, straight from the lab. I presented all the time at conferences, at lab meetings, at the little seminars that we had, both in the institute and, for graduate school. So those all help. But the one thing that really helped me, I think, in the communication side that I would say is outside of the scope of what I learned is teaching dance, because I had to engage, like I did that all throughout grad school. I had to engage a whole bunch of adults in learning movements and making it funny, making them interested in the way you were saying it, but also delivering the content so that they, and I mean, I'm sure you're well aware of this as a person who's mentoring and leading students all the time. Like, it's you have to be an engaging person. And so that really taught me how to think about the strategy to communicate as well. So
And that's another extracurricular that you pulled, that experience from. So I'm just going to ask you, like, for our students that are listening, what can they do to bolster the credentialing that they would need to be competitive for these roles? And I can think of a million things like clubs and activities and student leadership roles, but do you want to mention maybe some things that you did while you were a grad student aside from adult dance teaching, which is a great fun fact. I did not know that about you. So
yeah, so during grad school, the one thing I did, which was sort of a bit of an extracurricular thing, is that I had this 8-week period before my defense date where I had, submitted my thesis, waiting for my external reviewer to actually provide comments, waiting for my defense date, which was organized, presentation was done, mock talk was done. So I had this 8-week period where you're just kind of in this waiting limbo. And I'm not very good with
waiting.
I don't respond well I need to be efficient. So I went to my supervisor and I said, hey, like, is there anything for me to do? Like, I kind of can't do any more of my future directions, or the papers are both submitted. Like, I'm just sitting here waiting. And she said, well, if you want, I have an editorial, which I am a reviewer on the board for. I'm the chief editor or something. I think she was chief editor at the time. If you like, we're having one of our first symposium meetings. If you like, you can generate some marketing material for it. Why don't you make some bookmarks? And also, I have this database of all of our reviewers. I want to update it with their information and their bios. Maybe you can work on that. So I just sort of said, well, I have nothing to lose. I did that. And it kind of gave me a glimpse of communications, like comms, like scientific communication, because you had to take what these very brilliant people did in their day job and make it sound like simplified enough where you could put it on a website. Or put it on a bookmark. So I did that, and that kept me occupied. She did pay me separately for that as a side job because it had nothing to do with my thesis. But it wasn't about the pay or the job. It was more like, what a great opportunity for me to learn how this works. And so when I ended up being a department manager, and one of the people who reported to me was a communications person, like, it was so easy to start thinking about communications as the way it's meant to be, right? It wasn't a completely new thing. Of course, I'm not a psychom expert in any way, but at least it familiarized me with that, world.
Yeah,
and
it gives you some
branch.
language, but it also gave you some great connections as well. So,
That's right. Yeah.
That's all the reason to say yes to opportunities outside of your lab work, because you just grow in ways that you probably don't imagine.
Yes.
And that you never know when you're going to need those skills.
That's
But
it.
inevitably they will come in handy.
They always do. And, it sounds very cliche. Like, you take every challenge as an opportunity. So cliche. How many times have we heard this?
But so true.
It's so true. It's taking a problem and figuring out, how can I solve this? And if you can't, that's okay. Maybe you can perhaps work towards solving it by bringing in the right players. And that's always been my motto, even today in my current job. Because to be honest with you, even problems that come to me today are not problems that, you know, 30 other people haven't tried to solve. It usually comes to me because it is complicated and it requires some more decision making that they're not able to do. So I just use that even today. Like, can I solve it? And can I make a reasonable decision? And what's reasonable? You know, my mentor years ago told me this: I never hire people who are geniuses. I hire people who care and have good common sense. And I think that's exactly my motto, right? Like, if somebody cares, they can learn, right? They have the ability to learn. And if they have common sense, that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Because this is not rocket science. If we've gotten a PhD, if we've gotten a master's, we're capable of doing that
Right.
science,
You've
right?
already proven yourself.
That's it.
Yeah. How pervasive are these roles? Like, how common is it to have a director? I mean, I would think it's very similar in Toronto. All the institutes are going to have some kind of an Office of Research Administration and a director of that. Obviously, our students are not typically going to jump right into these roles. What are some of the entry level positions that they can kind of climb up into, and how common are these kinds of jobs? Are they becoming more common as we're kind of consolidating our resources and becoming more efficient in terms of our research, stretching our research dollars across the country? How is it compared to the US? I think always US is kind of a little more advanced than Canada, but we're getting there. But can you comment on those things?
Yeah, so I'll start with the entry level jobs. So there's typically three ways, is the way I see it, you can get into research administration. I'm sure there's others, but three ways that I can think of. There is research operations, which would be something related to lab management. Those are great for people who have had bench work experience. If you don't have bench work experience, there's a lot of data related research jobs. So bibliometrics, assessing impact for research. Those typically there's a few roles in every university that has that. And I know the hospitals also have to report on this. So just in the TASM community alone, there's a few of these jobs. Then there is, outside of the whole operations world, there's also like development, research development jobs, and these tend to be, sometimes they're dubbed research development officers or award development officers or strategic development officers. That's what they're typically called. They tend to be more given to PhDs who have experience in writing grants, fellowships, but they're also an amazing opportunity if you are interested in term roles. For example, someone is away on mat leave, you get a 1.5 year opportunity to learn about research development. A lot of the very senior folks may not take that job because they have stable jobs themselves. So it's a great entryway for you to gain the experience in order to get more like stable jobs. And then the third thing would be science communications. Some people are naturally very good with social media, with marketing, with website development. I would say any opportunity you can get to do even contract work on those would be amazing to build your resume. And you don't have to wait until you graduate to do that. You can do that as a side job, even at small, like hourly times. Because I know depending on the workload of your PhD, it may or may not be possible. But like I said, I did this during the eight-week period that I was waiting for my defense. So there's always downtime depending on where your project is at. Those are sort of the three main areas. And then, of course, if you have some kind of a co-accounting designation. So, for example, let's say you did a PhD, but your bachelor's was in some form of accounting, or you're just, you did a summer job as a bookkeeper somewhere. Those are great ways to build your CV to potentially get into finance roles at the university where you're managing research grants, where you're administering research grants. Because even if you're a full-blown accountant, the university's research system is very different. Their finance system is very different. So you still have to learn how to operate their database, et cetera. So you would be learning it anyway, but the principles are there with you. So if that's your interest, great. Some people, they have an MBA before they even start their PhD. You could think about doing some industry positions that are, also an opportunity. I know a few of my colleagues actually ended up doing masters in biotechnology, and then their whole career has been with, Roche and JSK, and so there's also other opportunities too if you're interested. Again, it really is about what you enjoy at the time and taking advantage of that. And honestly, like everybody makes it seem as if you know what your path is, but I think it's just taking those little signs of light and following them and trying to understand, is this a good thing for me to learn? Not, is this going to be my future career? I don't think I ever thought about that. It was literally like a pinball machine. I was sort of going, oh, I like this. Oh, well, maybe I'll go. And here I am, like 15 years later. And I really feel like I never left the university, but I've been doing completely different things from when I was doing bench work.
I think those are often the most interesting career trajectories where you just kind of go on some job that you hear or an interesting connection or relationship that you made that you want to follow. And this sounds interesting, so I'm going to follow this. And it's like self-detective work. You just kind of feel your way
Find your way
through your career rather than I have to get from point A to point B and I'm going to do it in the short. And there are people that do that. And it's fantastic if they can do it. But I think more often than not, it's like that pinball machine where you just kind of bounce and keep learning and growing and hearing of opportunities and then taking leaps and trying something new. And yeah, you've obviously found your way.
I think it's also like, some of your career growth is compatible with your growing life, right? What you perhaps found pleasing as a graduate student is different than what I find pleasing now, like 15 years later. Right now, my priority is time with family, balance, making sure that I can do the work in a balanced way. It's, you reach a point in your career where it's not about, more titles, more money, more power. It's really about, that's great. I want to do more. I want to learn more. But that doesn't necessarily have to come as an expense to my family, because before it was all about me. And now, like, my career choices, I think at this stage of my life are a little bit more thoughtful and a little bit more planned, because I want to make sure that whatever decision I make, what that impact would be, I'm walking into it with completely, known thought. It's not an obscure potential. It's like, is it actually going to do something bigger for my career without impacting my family?
Right, because it's not just an impact on you.
That's right.
It's an impact on, other people
That's right.
that are part of the equation. So that's why it's always great to reassess at every point in your life, because your circumstances change, your motivations change.
That's
But
right.
I think ultimately, like you described, that harmony is what you're looking for. You want to be stimulated in your job, you want to be great at your job, but you don't want it to completely compromise, what else is important in your life. So would you say you have that now?
I would say I have it as best as I can. I've set myself up that way, but any future add-on would have to be really reassessed. Like, I would have to, I want to make sure my children are young, so I want to make sure I'm at the point where they're self-sufficient. And maybe at some point, that's the perfect opportunity for me. So this is the other thing, we think about opportunities as they're available, but the timing for which they fit your life, whatever stage of your life you're at, is also a huge part of whether or not you move into that. So for me, it worked. The timing worked in the middle of all this. I had 2 children and somehow I got by, but I don't think I could have fast forwarded anymore if I, like, with the kids that I had. I think this is the highest pace I could have gone through, knowing that I had 2 children in the middle of all this. So it's, I think that's the other thing, is that you kind of have to forgive yourself if you go a route and you don't like it, or you thought you were going to like it and it doesn't quite work out. It's not what you thought. That's a learning experience of its own. And I think you have to, it's the fear that is worse than the doing, right? Put the fear aside, do it. What's the worst that could happen? You go back and you do something else, right? So it's not the end of the world. And I think this was really hard for me to find out after like it took me a while, I think, to realize after grad school, because in grad school, like, you don't want to make a mistake. You don't, like, you think about every step of the way. You're very cautious about your experiments, but I think in real life, you don't need to be that cautious. You actually just need to, like I said, common sense. You just have to walk forward and know when to walk back. And I think as long as you keep that as your main sort of motto, you'll be fine.
Very good advice. I keep thinking, like, you're so positive, and it sounds like you can handle a lot of the stress and the challenges, which, I know the obvious answer to what are your greatest challenges at work, other than the volume. What are some of the biggest challenges that you face in your role, and how do you approach problem solving those challenges?
In my role, the biggest challenge tends to be governance. And it's partly because our office is a decanal office, so we liaise with space, with IT, with so many different units, even within medicine, let alone the departments. So governance can sometimes be challenging if you have people who don't understand the full picture. For example, if I'm saying no to one department, you can't really do this, I have to provide a reason why and a solution. And sometimes I can't give that reason because it's confidential or because the decision hasn't quite been made. Or so, the hardest part of my job is navigating how to say no and how to say yes, right? It's just strategizing with the right players so that, when you go into a meeting, the decision is sort of prepped and you just have to get buy-in from people. And that's across the board. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the education file or the research file. I generally tend to run into that. And, having a good relationship with my boss, like, Dr. Noel, is amazing, because it's one of those things that you want the right supporters who understand what you're trying to do, to back you up and also to guide you when you're wrong, right? To give you some context, because, I'm not perfect. I could make mistakes too, right? Having someone to check on you, but also support you, and then build that case with all these external forces that you have no direct authority over, but have to receive buy-in. Something as simple as harmonized base funding agreement for the students. We have to get buy-in from every chair. So I have to present the numbers. And so I got to be so clear and so transparent so that they know what they're agreeing or disagreeing to. That's probably the hardest part of my job, is going through the governance structures to make things happen, because it does slow down your efficiency, but it's intended to make sure you make the right decision when you're in a leadership role. So it's sort of, it's a catch-22, right? When you're taking on these decanal jobs, that's the role. You have to be equitable, thinking of every student, and it slows you down because you have to get buy-in for a lot of people.
Right.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here, Sara? Like, where do you go in 5 or 10 years? What are your career aspirations in the future? Do you want to maintain the role you're in? Do you want to grow into something more? What would the natural progression be for somebody in your role right now?
It's a very good question. And, I'm sort of at the cusp of, do I want, if in the university, probably the natural progression would be to be more involved in some of the politics and the finance. And I'm not sure that's for me, because that's like, full disclosure, that's the part of my job that's the hardest, right? And it's the most taxing. Maybe
So
in a few years,
what would those positions be
they
in
would
terms
be
of
like,
title?
administrative leads
Yeah.
for divisions, like chief
Yeah.
administrative officers,
Yeah.
or, and a lot of people from like my background have done that. There's examples of that from research, because it's really about experience and understanding the context. They're very broad roles. But it would be more dipping into financial management, much more conflict management, and just way more governance. Like, you'd be in meetings 24/7 almost. Like, that's the bulk of your job. Even now I have to protect my calendar certain times of the day so that I can actually do my own work rather than guide others to do theirs. Because I actually do have stuff that I have to do that only I can do. And, it's very challenging balancing. I cannot imagine more meetings, because more meetings and more events means less flexibility, less time with family. So for now, my goal is to sort of maintain where I'm at. Maybe in a few years, I will contemplate if I want to pursue further careers here in the university, which would be on those lines, or if I want to completely start something new. So I've always kind of toyed with the idea of, like, I never intended to stay at the university all my life, right? Feels like I've never left. And I always think about, the grass is greener on the other side, like what's out there. And I'm sort of the kind of person, if I feel like I'm enjoying and I'm learning and I'm helping, then I'm good. But if I feel like now I'm stagnant and I'm not moving, then anything is possible. It doesn't have to be necessarily a career here in the university, even with 15 years seniority. Like, I'm perfectly fine starting something fresh, because that'll teach me a completely different perspective. Yeah. I wouldn't want to eliminate that opportunity just for the sake of saying that I have seniority here. And yeah.
So if you could wave a magic wand and you could go back 20 years, what would you do? Would you do it all over again, or would you choose something different?
I consider myself very lucky. I don't think I would do it exactly the same way. I don't think I even realized how lucky I was to get here until now that I'm here. You know what I mean? It's sort of, at the time, it just felt like I was that pinball. Mm-hmm. I never saw the bird's eye view of it. So if anything, I regret not appreciating it more. Because now when I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so stressed out about these problems, and I wish I would have just taken it in a little bit more and enjoyed it a little bit more. So that's the one thing I regret. But
you would choose the same path.
100%. I don't regret my graduate education. I don't regret any of the job, even like early on, being a lab manager, holding coffee and grabbing the coffee and the sweets for the lab meetings. Like, I don't regret any of that. I think it was all a learning opportunity. So, yeah.
So there you go, kids. Appreciate your degrees. We've come to the end of our time. I've enjoyed it so much. But before we leave, we get our guests to do a 1-minute pitch on their career. So could you tell our listeners, mostly graduate students and postdocs, why a career in administration is a great option for them?
You get to be around very, very smart people, very creative people. You enable their work. You facilitate their work. You literally take away problems from them that they don't know how to solve, which is HR, finance, admin. They don't want to touch it. They're excellent scientists, but they don't want to look at that. So you are the superhero of their world in some ways, because you just take away those problems and you solve it for them. And then more importantly, you liaise how important it is, the work that they're doing, with the accountants and the leaders and the administrators, so that they can actually help them more. So being their voice is something, I'm very proud of. I actually know what's an unreasonable ask from a faculty and what's not, even though to the accountant, they both seem the same, right? So having that context, I think, is very valuable. And the more and more scientists actually take administration as a serious career, I think the better our administration will be able to serve those scientists.
Amazing. Dr. Sharifpoor, thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.